Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope everyone had a lovely, lovely Thanksgiving. It's good to have you all back. One of the things that I'm thankful for is the opportunity to be here with all of you and to learn some Torah together. I think there's a spot right there on the back row. No.
Back row, yeah.
So Nick, you know what? Grab that chair that's in the back over there and just put it next to one of these tables. Okay. You can come sit next to Ivan, all the way in the front. Okay. All right. Got a full house tonight. Wonderful to see all of you. Thank you for being here. And let's get started. So we're up to lesson 5. In case you're missing your textbook, we have the copies in the back table over there. Go and grab one. And we will get started. So previously in the Kabbalah of Meaning, we have been discussing how to create and find meaning and purpose in our lives. What we're going to explore this evening is, what about the things that we don't create? What about the things that we're not in charge of? What about the unchosen or the unexpected, or maybe even what many might perceive as the unwanted? How can we find meaning, or can we inject meaning into those experiences? Let's do a quick review of what we've been discussing until now. So we have tonight's lesson. Let's just see why my little thing here is not working. There we go. We have lesson 1. Lesson 1, we focused on this idea that King Solomon teaches us in the book of Mishlei, in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the book of Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, that human beings, with all the comforts in the world, are still finding a lot of emptiness in their hearts. As some people put it, a God-sized hole in the heart of every single human being. And so we hunger for meaning, and we talked about some of the ways that we can inject meaning into our lives. Lesson 2, we said that meaning alone is not enough, and that humans really need to have purpose. And we talked about the difference between meaning and purpose. Meaning is something that starts with me, and then you inject meaning into your me, into your existence. Whereas purpose is something which is designed and comes before you exist, before the me, and then you live within that purpose. Now, obviously, in order to have purpose, we need to know what our purpose is. And so we talked in lesson 3 extensively about the underlying purpose of creation, the idea that Hashem wants to have a home, quote unquote, for himself or herself or itself. God has all those progressive pronouns, right? In this world, and that we do that through taking the mundane and taking off its mask and revealing how the mundane is truly sacred and is a vehicle for the divine. A very important idea in Kabbalah. Lesson 4, fascinating discussion that we had last Monday, is that we talked about time. Time in Judaism is very, very important. It's not just some utilitarian concept that humans came up with, but rather time is very deep. Time was created. Bereshis, in the beginning, God created. What did God create? The first thing God created was time, because time represents the energy that comes into the world in every single moment. Who remembers, how often does the energy enter the world? How often is God's energy newly injected into the world? A little trivia from last week. How many times? No, but how many moments? How, more specifically, how often every hour? Something close. 1,080, exactly. 1,080 moments or halakim or portions of every hour. Jews measure time based on years, months, weeks, days, hours. And then instead of minutes, we have halakim. Halakim means parts of an hour. How many parts of an hour? 1,080. You find this in Jewish law. Kabbalah tells us why 1,080. Why not 360? And it gives you all those good mathematical calculations, just as good as 1,080. And the answer is that according to Kabbalah, Hashem's energy is re-injected into the world 1,080 times every hour, or approximately every 3 seconds, which corresponds to the frequency of the average human breath. Because we are breathing in Hashem's new injection of energy into the world. Every 3 seconds, God gives a new injection of energy into the world. Physically, that is the life-giving force of oxygen. And therefore, our body is created, is designed in such a way, we take a breath and the heart does its pumping, and that new oxygen is assimilated throughout the body. And so we are literally breathing in godliness into our existence, assimilating it throughout our body, and giving ourselves the strength to fulfill our purpose in the world. That's time. That's time according to Kabbalah. Now, on a more textured level, there are special times. There are unique and meaningful and memorable times and moments in time, opportunities in time. We gave that famous mashal, the example of the king and the prince and the water wells. You remember this from last week? Some of you do. Okay? That also is connected with the significance of special moments in our calendar. And so until now, we've talked about things that we do, things that we actively engage with in order to inject meaning and purpose into life. Tonight, we will embark on the purpose of the unchosen, of the unplanned, or the unwanted sometimes, okay? And that's what we're going to explore this evening. Can I find meaning in things that I didn't choose? This is a very, very important question, because if you really think about it, as much as we human beings like to be in control of everything, and the Kabbalists tell us it's not because we're just big egos, although that too, but that from a very, very spiritual perspective, we are created in the image of God, which means there are certain divine properties that God decided to invest into the human being. Not that a human being is God, let's be clear, but that humans are in the image of God. And therefore, we have this desire to be godlike. And one of the main things that God does is control everything. And so we humans want to be in control of everything. That's why, for example, we hear about a tragedy, right? What do we immediately try to do? We try to explain why it happened, try to make sense of it. Why? Because we don't like to not be in control. It bothers us. We feel out of sorts when we're not in control. By the way, total side point, when it comes to dealing with children, it's important to give children as much control as possible over their lives. This doesn't mean that we don't guide and discipline and lay down the law, but as much as possible, we try to give our children choices. Like, for example, if you're telling a little child to go to bed, what you say to the child is, do you want to go to your room through that door or through this door? Now, that might sound ridiculous, but the child appreciates the opportunity to decide something about his life which is out of control because he doesn't want to go to bed. So you're giving him back some control, and then he feels more at ease. So we humans like to be in control. And the thing is that much of life is actually not in our control. Let's think about this philosophically for a second, okay? The fact that we have free choice as human beings, which is a basic Jewish idea, actually doesn't make any sense. It's an anomaly in comparison to an infinite God who is the mover and source of everything and all existence. How in such a reality can a human being have free choice? And it's a good question. And it's a difficult question. It's a question that all the Jewish philosophers struggle with. And they have a good time. They go to town trying to figure out, so how does this work? If God is in control of everything, how do we have free choice? And we're not going to dive into that right now. But the main thing that I'm pointing out to you is the fact that we can control anything in our lives is an anomaly, is a gift from God. It's something that only God can make possible. Because in reality, God is in control of everything. And so, with so many things not in our control, with so many things happening beyond our control, how do we feel meaningful if we're not in control? And that's going to be our discussion for this evening. Let's open up to an interesting exercise, exercise 3.1. Open up your books over here for a second. We don't have to go through the whole thing in great detail, but basically what we're trying to do here is, if you can either write down or think about 2 or 3 things that you chose to do that felt meaningful. Again, don't get too deep over here, not too complicated. No one's going to test you on this. You don't have to show this to your mother-in-law. It's okay. Don't worry about it. 2 or 3 things that you chose to do that felt meaningful. And yeah, recently, whatever, don't you know? We're on page 127. You're welcome. Okay, all right. Now, 2 or 3 things that happened to you. You didn't choose to do them, they just happened. Anybody want to think of anything? Yeah, right.
Wake up in the morning.
Yeah. Things that you chose to do, right? The examples that they gave was I visited someone in the hospital or I spent time studying Torah. Again, just anything that you want to think of. The next section is things that happened that you didn't choose to do. They happened to you. You got stuck in traffic. There was some sort of thing that happened in the world that you don't have control over, that you're thinking about a lot, right? A terrorist attack or something, whatever it is, right? The point that we're getting to over here is, and again, we're not going to spend too much time on this exercise, is that try to think how you feel about things that you chose to do. How do I feel? It feels very personal. It feels connected to me. I decided to do it. And if it's something that I chose to do that was meaningful, it feels deeply meaningful. Why? Because of the me that was involved in this activity. But when something happens to you, when something is chosen for you, like a canceled appointment, or you got stuck in traffic, or the pipes bursting in your house, or et cetera, you came to the JLI class and there was no more sushi. I mean, these are like, mini tragedies that happen in the world, right? It doesn't feel personal. You don't feel personally connected to this. And therefore, how could this be meaningful? And so the truth is, if you think about it, a lot of life is these things that we don't have control over. So much of life is things that are beyond our, what we call human free choice, right? The choices that we make are very important. I'm not minimizing free choice. It's usually about very important things. Moral decisions, ethical decisions, interpersonal, menschlichkeit, what kind of a person are you going to be, integrity. But how frequently are things happening in my world that I have no control over? And if that's the case, and we're trying to find meaning and purpose in everything in life, we have to address this chunk of life, this big chunk of life. What do we do with this chunk of life that we have no control over? And so therefore, what Kabbalah, yes?
Is there an assumption here that everything is meaningful, or something can happen that just happens?
So it's a fair question, right? It's a fair question. Maybe some things are not meaningful. Maybe meaning is only there when things are meaningful. And if things just happen by coincidence, then it's not meaningful. But somebody pointed out to me the word ko in Hebrew, this is a bit of a stretch, okay? God's name is Yud and Hey. Now, a religious person doesn't say God's name. So instead of saying Yud and Hey, which would be Yah, we say Ka, right? Like Hallelujah instead of Hallelujah, right? So if you say coincidence, what you're essentially saying is this is an incidence that comes from from God. There is no coincidence, right? And once you ponder what we've discussed earlier, that there's a purpose to life, right? We gave the example of if someone designed the perfect classroom, right? So you wouldn't say, okay, so what's the purpose of that shelf up there in the corner? That was just put there. No, if I design the perfect classroom, every single inch of that classroom is going to be there to help the instruction of children. Now, if somebody messed up and they put in an extra shelf, that's one thing. Humans do mess up. It happens, right? Especially if they're in Congress. But God is not in Congress. And so God doesn't mess up. And so if God designed human life, there's no extra shelf. And so if we talk about large chunks of human existence, of our lives, of the things that we do, of time spent, of activities, of things that we're involved with that are beyond our control, does it really make sense based on the things that we've discussed until now that literally it's happening without a purpose? Now you look around the world, you say to yourself, come on, all this has purpose. I mean, we're talking about, besides human beings, there's billions and trillions of these living, crawling things, moving parts all over the world. So let's jump into it. Let's see, what does Judaism say about the existence, about the reality that we live in, and to what extent is there design? To what extent is there purpose? Is there what we call hashgacha pratis, divine providence? Let's jump into it, okay? Because it's an important topic. Now, first of all, as you might imagine, I'm a rabbi. So when we ask the question, who wrote the script of life, of existence, I will argue, and Judaism agrees, that God wrote the script. God is the creator and designer of our existence. This is not some Kabbalistic idea, some mystical concept. A very rational Rambam, Maimonides, talks about this as the first of his 13 principles of faith. Maimonides tells us there are 13 principles upon which all Jewish faith rests. And the first of those principles is quoted here in text number 1. Let's look at it inside together. Text number 1 on page 128. I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is the creator and guide of all created beings. He alone made, makes, and will make all things. By the way, Maimonides' 13 principles of faith. Very, very important ideas. You may have heard of a song, Ani Ma'amin, about Mashiach. Ani Ma'amin B'viat HaMashiach. There was a famous basketball team that this was their Ani Ma'amin Mashiach, 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 right? That's the 12th of the 13 principles of faith about the coming of Mashiach. The first is the one that we just read. Maimonides tells us that God is the creator and guide of all things. He made, makes, and will make all things. Okay? So we have this idea that Hashem is the executive authority over all of existence. Hashem is all-knowing, omniscient. Hashem is omnipotent, all-powerful. Hashem is omnipresent. Hashem is involved and present in every single thing that happens in the world, which, by the way, brings up all kinds of theological issues. If that's the case, and God is also kind, according to Jewish teachings, as opposed to other philosophies that talk about a cruel God or a God of vengeance, etc. God is a kind God. So if God is knowledgeable and has power and is everywhere and is kind, what about all the suffering in the world? I'm glad you asked, because we're not going to discuss it in this lesson. It's a very good question. And it's a question that deserves a lot of discussion. It actually deserves 6 weeks. And we had not 1, not 2, but 3 entire JLI courses over the last 20 years that we've taught addressing this very issue. And there's much more that's needed. How could a good, powerful God allow so much suffering to take place? But let's put that aside for a minute, because if we get stuck on that, we're going to lose everything else that we're trying to get to. I'm honoring that topic as an important topic that has to be dealt with. We will, towards the end of our lesson, address briefly when it comes specifically to finding purpose in the wake of tragedy. And we'll get to that soon, okay? But if God is all of these things, it brings up all these different questions, but it also brings up the idea that God is involved and guides every single thing that happens in the world. Now, interestingly enough, this is not an idea which is exclusively in the realm of the religious or the spiritual. There have been scientific studies that have been done that show that human beings have this innate need to feel that there's a higher purpose or an order beyond our realm that gives purpose to things that take place in the world. An interesting text that we have over here, text number 2, which is on page 129. Lisa Miller, a psychologist and author, she was involved in a study, and she writes as follows, text number 2. Each of us is endowed with a natural capacity to perceive a greater reality and consciously connect to the life force that moves in, through, and around us. Whether or not we participate in a spiritual practice or adhere to a faith tradition, whether or not we identify as religious or spiritual, our brain has a natural inclination toward and a docking station for spiritual awareness. An awakened brain is available to all of us right here in our neural circuitry, but we have to choose to engage it. It's a muscle we can learn to strengthen or let atrophy. And this is very important. Just because we have this in potential doesn't mean it is active in our day-to-day decision-making, in our day-to-day conscious thought. It's something we, just like any other muscle, if you don't strengthen it, it is weak, it atrophies. Just ask anyone who hasn't exercised in a while and then goes to the gym how they feel for a couple of days afterward. Their muscle is screaming out, hey, you haven't used me in a couple of years. What's going on, right? Same thing is what happens with this particular muscle as well. Now, if this is the case with all human beings, how much more so with the Jewish people? The Jewish nation, we're told, has a spiritual DNA. We are all spiritual, if not physical, descendants of Abraham and Sarah, Abraham and Sarah, the first Jewish mother and father. And I say physical because anyone who's born to Jewish parents and traces their lineage back to Jewish people is certainly a physical descendant of Abraham and Sarah. But there are millions and millions of human beings who join the Jewish people as righteous converts, and they are spiritual descendants of Abraham and Sarah. They are children of Abraham and Sarah. And Abraham and Sarah were told that as a result of their dedication, of their devotion to God, of their sacrifice, they will give a spiritual inheritance to the Jewish people, to Jewish people for all time to come. And one of those things is that they have emunah. They have a faith. They have a sense that there's something higher, there's something deeper that gives order and design to all of our existence. Now, we too, just because we're Jews, doesn't mean this is something that we will feel present without exercising it, without exercising this muscle, but it's something that exists nonetheless. So let's take some time to really delve into this. What is this Jewish faith that Maimonides focuses on in his first of the 13 principles, that there is a God who creates and guides everything in the world? What does this mean? To what extent is it? How active is God in the world? How personal is this? Let's really get into this from a deep Kabbalistic perspective. Okay, so first of all, let's turn to an interesting text from our prayers. We say this every single day in our morning prayers. Text number 3. In his goodness, it says, God renews each day continually the act of creation. Hamechadesh b'tuvay b'chol yoim tamid maseh bereshis. God in his goodness every day renews creation. And he brings a proof text from King David, from Tehillim, from Psalms, from the Bible. As it is said, give thanks to he who makes great luminaries, for his kindness is eternal. Now, what is the proof from the text? Which word are we focusing on in the text that tells us that God renews continually the act of creation? Which word? I'm sorry? Luminaries. Why luminaries? Okay, but that tells us that God is renewing continually. How do you see that in luminaries? Okay. Okay, so they're the ones that sort of count time for us. Okay, fair enough. Anything else? Any other word here that tells us that God is not just a one-time creator, but is continually involved, renewing creation? Tamid, or in English?
All the time, continues.
Okay, but that's the statement in the beginning. I'm asking you the text that he quotes from Psalms. Where do we see in that text? I'm sorry? Eternal. His kindness is eternal. Now, one second. If God would have created the world one time and the world exists until today, is that not an eternal kindness? I'm still looking for one more word here. Okay? He who makes great luminaries. We should have said, give thanks to he who made great luminaries. Because when did he make great luminaries? According to the Torah, 5,786 years ago. When you say to he who makes great luminaries, what does that mean? When were these made? Hayoim, today. They were made today on the 13th of Kislev. Or what is it, December 3rd? What are we up to? December 3rd, 2025. He made great luminaries. Or more specifically, 1,080 times every hour. That's what King David's referring to. Because God is continuously renewing the act of creation. Okay? And let's jump into this, okay? Because actually, it's not so obvious. There are actually two philosophies as to how God interacts with the world. The conventional wisdom says, and this was adopted not by Jewish sources, but by other philosophical sources. If you look into the works of Aristotle and others, they say that God is the prime mover of all of existence. God is the initiator of this system that we call the world with all of its natural ways. God is the designer, God is the initiator, God is the prime mover. But once he gets it started, it exists. Okay? Just like my good friend who happens to be on Zoom, my good friend Kenneth Spector, Casriel. When he painted it, he was Kenneth. Now he's Casriel. There's this beautiful olive in the back of the room. You see the olive painting that everyone sees? My friend Casriel painted that. Okay? When did he paint it? He painted it probably 25 years ago. Right? He didn't paint it today. And it's here. It exists. Right? God created the world 5,786 years ago, and it's here. Why do we have to say God is continuously recreating the world? For what? For what purpose? Okay? So the Shalah, the famous Kabbalist, Rabbi Yeshaya Halevi Horowitz of the 16th century, he discusses the two options of how we can look at God. Let's look at text number 4. The common understanding of how the heavenly forces operate is this. God, the blessed creator, brought everything into being from absolute nothingness and therefore has the power to do whatever he wills, even to override or suspend the natural order. At the outset, he assigned spiritual forces to govern the world, each one appointed over its own realm. The world continues to function according to these systems as if his hand has stepped back, except on such occasions when he chooses to intervene and override them. It's sort of like you think of a factory that has its systems, but there's a supervisor who intervenes every time the machine messes up or he decides to change something, so he intervenes. But otherwise, the system is working on its own. Okay? So then these forces operate through the power he originally placed within them at the time. Until then, these forces operate through the power he originally placed within them at the time of creation. That's the conventional wisdom of how God interacts with the world. But then he continues, but in truth, as a true Kabbalist, he says, as it seems to me, our faith teaches otherwise. God in his goodness is constantly and deliberately renewing the act of creation every single day. His influence is ongoing and intentional. If for even a moment he were to withdraw this flow, everything would immediately dissolve into nothingness. All of existence would simply cease. Why? Why is this? It sounds good. It's a nice concept. It sounds nice. It sounds comforting that God is so involved in the world. 1,080 times every hour, he's bringing the world into existence. Beautiful. But why? Why is it necessary to see it this way? Is there any logic, so to speak? Okay. So let me share with you the following example, and then we'll see the next text. My child is playing, takes a pile of Legos and turns it into a fire truck. Okay, you with me here? Fire truck is sitting here on the table. Sounds good? All right. He steps away from the fire truck. It stays where it is, right? It doesn't go back to being a pile of Lego. It remains a fire truck. Okay. Until my younger child comes and destroys it, and then they get into a fight. This is the story of my existence, okay? All right. Now my child does something else. He takes 3 balls and he begins to juggle them. And we have this amazing art being created in the air of balls jumping in different directions, and they're moving in different directions, okay? So he created a fire truck out of Lego, and he created the art of these balls going up in the air. And now as soon as he stops doing the juggling, what happens to the balls? They fall to the ground. They end up back in a pile. The fire truck doesn't go back to being a pile of Lego, but the balls go back to being a pile of balls as soon as he stops. What's the obvious reason? The obvious reason is that you're not doing anything against nature, so to speak. There's nothing unscientific or going against the nature of the Lego when you form it into a fire truck. But when you throw balls up into the air, you're going against the nature of the world, which is the gravitational pull. So as soon as you stop putting your energy into the balls that they go up into the air, what happens? They revert back to their natural state, which is to fall with the gravitational pull. In a similar sense, explain the Kabbalists, there's a very big difference between us taking something which already exists, like my friend Casriel taking canvas and paint and a paintbrush and incredible God-given talent and making a beautiful painting. Because he took existent material and turned it into a painting, there was nothing unnatural about that process. It was talented, but there was nothing unnatural about it. And therefore, it remains here for 25 years. Bis 120 until 120 and beyond. Okay. But God doesn't take material and create the world. With what does God create the world? From nothing. What does that mean, from nothing? From God, right? We call it nothing because we don't know what it is. But it's from infinity. It's from infinite divine energy. It's from Or Ein Sof, the infinite light that flows without limitation, without shape, without form. That energy turns into world. Now, the nature of that energy, and I'm using the word nature in quotes, is to be infinite. Think of the scientific nature, just like the scientific nature of balls is to fall to the ground. The scientific nature, in quotes, of divine energy is to be what? To be divine, to be infinite. And so in order to go against the nature of that existence and to have a finite world remain in existence, it's like throwing the balls up into the air. You have to constantly be investing energy into making that happen. As soon as you stop, what happens? The world ceases to exist. And therefore, therefore, says King David, the world is continuously being brought and renewed into existence. Just to give one other little example, okay? I take a big pool of water, and with all my might, I blow with tremendous force into the center of the water. What happens in the center of the water? There's a little vacuum that's created in the center, a little hole, a measurable hole in the center of the water. I run out of breath. What happens to the hole? It disappears. I created a hole. Why doesn't it stay like Casriel's painting? And the answer is because that hole goes against the nature of water. The nature of water is to go back to its original state. The only way to push the water aside is if there's constant injection of force pushing the water aside. And therefore, for a moment, I stop pushing the water, it goes back to its original state. It's sort of like, think for a moment about the miracle of God splitting the sea, which was a big miracle, right? Then it was completely against the nature of water, which is to remain in its place. If there's nothing holding the water back, it comes back to its place. And therefore it says, as long as God, so to speak, was blowing the water to either side in the story of the splitting of the sea, as long as that energy was being injected, the water stood against its nature. And as soon as God stopped, it fell back and went back to its original state. The entire world's existence is like that wall of water, being held in place by God's constant flow of energy into the world. This is the way the Kabbalists explain existence. So is God involved in our world? Is God involved in our existence? You betcha. Because if for a second he would stop being involved, the whole thing falls apart. The whole thing doesn't exist. Okay? Let's see this inside from a beautiful text from Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the book of Tanya. Text number 5. The English is on page 132. It's a long text, but this is foundational stuff. Focus here. Focus here for a moment. This idea offers a clear response to those who deny divine providence and the miracles of the Torah. Their mistake lies in a false comparison. They imagine that God's creation of the heavens and earth is like human craftsmanship. Just as a craftsperson may make a vessel and then walk away with the vessel remaining intact, without the artisan's ongoing involvement, they assume the same is true of the world that once created, it runs on its own. This was the argument of Aristotle. But they fail to see a critical difference. When humans create something, they're not creating from nothing. They just reshape existing material like turning a piece of silver into a utensil. But God created the world out of absolute nothingness. That's a far greater wonder, even more astounding than the splitting of the sea. Take that miracle as an example. God used a strong east wind to split the sea. He's paraphrasing from the verses here. And the water stood like a wall. Page 133. But if the wind had stopped for even a moment, the waters would have immediately returned to their natural state and flowed back down, and they would not have continued standing as a wall on their own. So how much more so with creation itself, which is something from nothing. That's beyond nature and an even greater miracle than the splitting of the sea. It's beyond nature because the nature of God is to be infinite. The nature of God, I know that we have a hard time putting this together because we think of nature as not being God, because God is not nature. But the nature of God is to be God. The nature of infinite is to be infinite. And therefore, it's beyond nature for God to bring the finite into existence. If God were to stop sustaining the world for even a moment, God forbid, it would vanish into nothingness. The world continues to exist only because his creative energy is constantly present within it, giving it life every second. Okay? So let's just summarize a couple of points over here. The Shalah that we referenced earlier in text number 3 said there's two options. There's a one-time creation, where God created everything and then assigned celestial forces to manage the world. Or we have this idea that the Kabbalists talk about, based on the words of King David, God is constantly renewing the act of creation. His influence is ongoing and intentional. And this is very similar, perhaps, to one-time creation would be a painting. You put a painting on the wall. Constant creation would be likened more to a projection. As long as the energy is projecting, the painting on the wall exists, so to speak. As soon as the machine stops projecting, it ceases to exist. Okay? So this is a very, very powerful point. And what this brings us to is that if God is constantly bringing this, and when I say this, I mean everything human and animal and vegetable kingdom and minerals and everything in this physical existence. If God is constantly investing his energy to bring this into existence, it is with a purpose. Think of a movie director, right? One of the differences between a mediocre movie and a great movie, and this is coming from a person who's watched thousands of movies, is that a really great director puts a lot of effort. Obviously, you need a good story and good actors and millions of dollars to spend in production, but it's also about not having anything unnecessary in the movie. Everything is there by design. Some of the actors are called extras, but actually there's no such thing as an extra. Because if you're really an extra, you're not in the movie, right? If you're truly an extra, you're not there. They tell some people, show up, maybe you'll be an extra. If you didn't make it into the movie, then you were really an extra. Otherwise, you're not an extra. In fact, a really good designer, a really good writer and producer, every item that's in the scene, every prop, every dish, every painting on the wall, everything is there by design. Everything is there with a purpose, right? There's an interesting principle that's taught in schools in film production. I forget the name of it. We'll have it in a second in the video. Where if it's there at any point in the movie, it has to be there for a purpose, or else it was extra, or else it was unnecessary. Okay, so if this is the case with a human writer and director of a movie, how much more so with God, the designer of this entire existence? There's no coincidence. It's all coincidence. It's all incidences that are being brought into existence by God himself. Let's watch this clip, which brings out this point in a beautiful way. Up on the screen. Why isn't my sound working? Let's see this for a second. 1 second here. Sorry. Give me a second. Sound. How does this work? Is the screen working?
Yeah. Well,
Your device.
I get it. Let me see. Why wouldn't this be working? Let's see. 1 second. Let's figure this out. Current slide. Okay. Let's see this. We're going to share this again. Can you see it now on the screen?
no. Yeah. Oh, no.
Okay, good. Good. We're getting somewhere. Okay. So now let's see if this works. Now let me just share it with our friends on Zoom, and we're back in business. Why isn't this here? Here we are. No, here we are. Here we are. Right, we're good? You can see it?
Yeah.
Excellent.
You're in your seat as the story begins. You notice the way he stands, his accent, his jacket. You notice the gun on his belt, a symbol of bravado. But you didn't think he'd use it. Well, you should have, at least according to a rule known as Chekhov's gun. Anton Chekhov, the 19th century Russian playwright, taught that in a well-written story, every detail must serve the plot. If in the first act you hang a pistol on the wall, it should be fired in the next. Otherwise, don't put it there. In a masterful story, nothing is extra. Every prop has a purpose, every line carries weight. Nothing is random. Is there a storyteller more masterful than the creator of the universe? Is there any story more layered than the one you're living? One of Judaism's oldest mystical texts, Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, describes God as a divine scribe, writing reality into being. We're not just characters in the story. We are the story. And just like a screen goes black when the projector stops, our world depends on God's light every moment. Creation isn't a one-time event. It's continuous, intentional, ongoing. If God stops writing, we stop being. And in his story, in your life and in every event, every detail matters. Every scene, every object, every moment, every choice. If it's here, it has a role. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. Sure, things can look totally random, even horribly random at times. But the author gave us tools to seek the meaning, to live with purpose, even when the plot twists.
Okay, so now we have this controversy among even Jewish sages and philosophers where they say, okay, fine. So God has a purpose for everything that happens, and they call it hashgacha, which means the providence, God's supervision or providence in the world, but it's hashgacha klolis. It's a general providence, meaning there's a general purpose to things happening in a certain direction, and maybe for certain nations, for certain individuals, for certain occurrences, it gets more granular, it gets more specific, right? They said there's like a general purpose to what's happening, but like the little details could also be incidental. Comes along Kabbalah and the teachings of Hasidus, and especially the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. This is one of the Baal Shem Tov's famous and most fundamental teachings, the founder of Hasidus. He says, no, it's not hashgacha pratis, it's hashgacha. It's not hashgacha klolis, it's not a general providence, but it's hashgacha pratis. It's God's involvement and caring about every single detail. Let's go back to our example of the movie, okay? So you have the director goes and writes the movie and every scene, every prop, okay? So in one of the scenes, one of the actors is drinking a soda. Does it really matter if it's Coke or Pepsi? Well, actually, Coke paid millions of dollars that it should be a can of Coke. So it absolutely is important. Okay, fine, millions of dollars, so that part is important. All right, but then something weird happens. A couple of scenes later, where again, the guy's drinking a can of soda, and this time, as he's drinking, he hears something that shocks him and causes him to sort of spit out the soda and choke on the soda. And here, it's not a can of Coke, it's a can of Pepsi. Okay, that's a coincidence. And that was just incidental. No. In this case, because he choked on it, Coke wanted it to be Pepsi. This actually happened, by the way. Okay? They wanted to advertise in this particular film Coke, and therefore they wanted a scene that put Pepsi in a bad light. Bad light? Yeah, this is the way people are. Every little thing is orchestrated. Says the Baal Shem Tov, God is orchestrating this world, but it's down to the most granular sense. Everything, every detail, every moment, even those things that are incidental in this important event that's taking place, every detail of every incidental thing, even that is being orchestrated. I mean, he took it to the extreme. If you look in text number 6, talking about the opinion of the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov explains, text number 6, that even a piece of straw or a torn leaf rolling in the street is subject to divine judgment. There is a decree for exactly how many times it should turn over, where it should roll, and in which place it should end up. Again, think about the movie director. Do you know how many times they go through a scene? 90 seconds over and over again until it is perfect, until the leaf turns over exactly 4.5 times, because that's exactly the way I want it. And this is what God says about every single detail of our world. And so taking it down to this level, we begin to see everything that's happening around us in a completely different and more meaningful light. Not just those things that are happening in our control, but especially those things that are happening beyond our control. Okay? Let's just, you have here a couple of examples. I don't know if we're going to go through each one in detail, but you can do this on your own, where he goes through a couple of different scenarios. Okay? For example, you're sitting in the airport. Let's go through the first one. Okay? You're sitting in the airport, page 134, and the screen flashes, flight delayed 3 hours. Okay? So the initial reaction of most people is, oh man, oh, this is so messed up. What's wrong with you people? I can't believe this. I'm going to miss this. I'm going to miss that. This is totally messing up my day, right? This is the reaction of most people. Someone who has worked on their faith, has trained, Emunah means training, by the way. They've trained to have faith and to see God's hand in everything. They take a deep breath and they say, there must be a purpose over here. This is from God. Right? Maybe there's someone who's running late. I'm reading here the first column, who absolutely must make this flight for reasons of geopolitical importance. This delay will allow them to make this flight. I'll try to be patient. God runs the world and is also watching to make sure I'll be fine. Okay? So I'm part of a bigger plan. Of course, this is for me inconvenient. This is not the best thing. But you know what? Maybe there's someone who has to catch this flight who's one day going to be the president and is going to save the world. I don't know. But God has a purpose. This flight is delayed for a good reason. I'm just going to relax and take it easy. Taking this now a step further, okay, you might say this delay must also be meaningful for me, middle column. Maybe it's protecting me from something. So this is not just about some greater master plan, some geopolitical earthquake, but there's something for me over here. Maybe something was going to go wrong with the weather if it were to have departed on time. Maybe the meeting I was supposed to attend and that I will now miss would not have been beneficial for me. Or maybe he's just giving me time to finally finish the book that I started reading in 2009. Okay. And then you take this now a step further. Not only is God making big things happen, not only is God caring that it should be best for me, but in addition, the third column, to all the previous truths about the reason for the delay, there's a reason I'm meant to be here now at this exact gate, at this exact hour. Meaning, we're not just saying there's a purpose in my missing my flight because I'm avoiding something that I wasn't supposed to do somewhere else. But here, my being here is also for a purpose. Meaning the thing that I thought wasn't supposed to happen is not true that I should avoid something wrong that was going to happen to me somewhere else. My being here is here for a purpose. Maybe I'll end up talking to the woman sitting next to me and she's someone I'm meant to meet. Maybe I'll learn something from watching the way someone handles their stress. Maybe the book I'm about to read during this delay will spark an idea that changes how I think, and so on, and so on, and so forth. And so what a Jewish person is supposed to do is to become aware and mindful of this reality. In every situation, in every circumstance that we find ourselves in, to remember and to contemplate, to think deeply about this reality of Hashgacha Pratis, of Hashem's divine design and purpose of everything that's happening. And with this, we move forward in accomplishing our purpose here in this world. David, you were asking a question. You had a question, David?
Drop the word avoid. So I was going to say, I was going to ask about avoiding.
Okay.
To avoid
Right.
something.
Correct.
Are we supposed to know and avoid it, or is it going to happen when we learn?
Yes.
Yes, bro.
Yes. We're supposed to use our God-given wisdom to try to avoid things that are not good for us. But when something happens that we perceive as not good, we're supposed to use our God-given wisdom and faith to try to see God's plan and purpose in what's happening to us. And even if we don't see it, to believe that it's there. And to be at peace. And to know that Hashem loves us and cares about us and is doing what's best for us and for all good people in the world. Okay? And this is a very, very important and fundamental idea. Just to give a slightly different twist. Okay? Imagine for a moment you work for the state of Israel. You work for the Mossad, for the Israeli Secret Service. And as we have all seen over the last couple of years, the Mossad does all kinds of very, very interesting and fascinating missions in places all over the world. Okay? So you are a Mossad agent in some foreign enemy country, some dangerous place. And because of how dangerous your mission is, and the chances that if you're caught, you will be tortured and interrogated, and you could spill the secrets of Israel, you are not told the details of your mission. All you're told is to go to a certain location and just be there. And instructions will come. And the instructions might not be clear. You're given some very general principles. Avoid these activities. On a daily basis, engage in these activities. Beyond that, be perceptive to your instructions. Use your seichel, use your brain to pick up the clues of what you're supposed to be doing. Because if we tell you now what's going to happen to you, what your purpose is, what the final mission is, we could put the entire country in danger if you're caught. Okay, so this person goes and they have their mission. And this actually happens. I'm not giving you some hocus pocus scenario. This actually happens. You know where this happens? This happens to us every single day. God put us in this world. God gave us some general instructions. He gave us a Torah. 365 things we should avoid doing. 248 things we should engage in as often as possible. Mitzvahs, positive commandments, prohibitions. Okay? Now we have some general guidelines. And then we have all kinds of things that are out of our control that are clues as to what our mission is. Where we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to interact with, where we're supposed to not be, what activities we're supposed to engage in, what work we're supposed to do, what our occupation is supposed to be, who our coworkers are supposed to be, who our neighbors are going to be, which house we're going to live in, which car we're going to drive, which streets are going to be closed, and you have to make a detour. Right? I was just in New Orleans for Thanksgiving. So New Orleans, thank God, was given, it's called the Big Easy, right? Everything's very, very slow. They were given like 5 years ago, a $17 billion grant to redo the whole sewer system. And it's taking them like 30 years to do it. And every street is closed. Right? You're driving here, you got to go here, you got to drive here, right? You know what? For whatever reason, God wanted me to be on this street that I grew up in this city, but I was never on this street before. Maybe a Jew has to say some words of Torah on the street. I have no idea, right? We are given a mission. We have a purpose in this world. Are we given a to-do list? 8 a.m. to 8:30, this is what you do. 8:35, you're going to meet this person? No, not all that is revealed to us. There's the perception of a lot of free choice, of a lot of self-control, of a lot of things that we're in control of, while in reality, there's very little that we're in control of. We have a couple of choices to make every day, and we have to use our wisdom, and we can choose to be lazy, and we can choose to be stupid, and we can choose to procrastinate, or we can choose to be hardworking and kind and intelligent and giving and selfless and benevolent. But beyond that, it's the things that are out of our control that our handlers are sending our way so we end up in the right direction. And so when something happens, instead of saying, oh, why is this happening to me? You say, oh, now I see where I was supposed to be at this time of the day. All right. I thought I was going to go over there, but now it's clear that I'm going to be here instead. I thought I was going to have this job, but it was given to somebody else. Instead, I got this, right? I bid on this house. I thought I was going to get it. I think I'm the best person. I even wrote a letter to the owner that me and my family belong in this house, and it was sold to somebody else. Oh, man, that's so frustrating. Or I think to myself, 1 second, the Talmud tells us clearly that one of the things that's bashert, one of the things that is divinely ordained before you're born is which house you're going to live in. Literally. Which house you're going to live in is bashert, is ordained from on high before you're born. because every soul has its particular portion of the world that spiritually it is compatible with, and that it uniquely can elevate to the divine realm, to the godly realm. How do I know where my portion of the world is? Maybe it's in Thailand. Maybe it's in New York. Maybe it's in Miami. Maybe it's in Northridge. I have no idea. I have to follow the divine cues. I have to embrace the things that are happening in my life that are out of my control as divine cues, as my handler sending me a clue as to what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Now, this doesn't mean that we give up all agency. We have a tremendous amount of responsibility, but it's specifically the things that are happening to us, the unchosen. That's where there's actually the greatest meaning. Because in the things that we choose, we can convince ourselves that we're in control. It's specifically the things that are out of our control, where it's crystal clear who is in control? Hashem. So actually, when are you welcoming God into your life? In the things that are out of your control. Right? At the beginning of this discussion, we said, hey, the things that I choose, that's meaningful, that's personal, that's much more connected to my purpose. I chose it. I chose to visit my friend in the hospital. I chose to study Torah from 12 to 12:30. In reality, the things that are out of my control, where I have the emunah and I embrace it as God orchestrating things in my life, that's where God is truly present, because my ego is completely pushed on the side. I had no plans to be doing A, B, and C. I planned something completely. My agenda for today was completely different. But I let go and let God. I let Hashem's agenda flow into my life. And that's when purpose and that's when meaning is truly taking place. Right? So we have something very, very powerful here, right? And actually, in the works of mental health, they discuss an interesting thing. They discuss that when it comes to a person accepting this in terms of a coping mechanism for unwanted or unchosen occurrences, there's actually two incredible things that take place, and two very, very healthy things that take place, right? One is called flexible goal adjustment, where you pivot to new or alternative goals when the original becomes unattainable. Instead of being stuck and digging in your heels and being frustrated and crying over spilt milk that perhaps never existed, we're willing to let go and let God and pivot to something new, something that is possible, something that we didn't expect, to the unexpected. And the second thing is we frame what is happening to us. We frame it in what? We frame it in Hashgacha Pratis, in divine providence. We frame it as God's plan for our existence. And it reduces a lot of the stress that we deal with on a regular basis. And so this is a very, very important idea, and it's something that we have to constantly think about because, sometimes Hashgacha Pratis, sometimes divine providence slaps you in the face. Sometimes it's like, whoa, I cannot believe what just happened. This was literally divinely orchestrated. I'll share an example. Not going to share any names, but I'll share an example, okay? As you all know, we have this beautiful program that we did last week. We had the Thanksgiving project. We gave out 150 meals. It was beautiful. And one of the recipients of these meals is Northridge Hospital. Northridge Hospital on Thanksgiving has a skeleton crew, specifically the maintenance people, the janitors, and the security guards. There's about 40 of them total who work over Thanksgiving. And it's tough. It's Thanksgiving, it's family time. And so we have a relationship with the chaplain, and he comes and he picks up 40 packages and he gives it out to these 40 people. And it's just a beautiful thing. And, for years, in the early days when I first came here, I used to go to Northridge Hospital every Friday, and I used to get a list of the Jewish patients, and I would visit them and I would interact with them. But now, as the responsibilities here have increased over the last decade or so, it's become difficult to do this on a regular basis. And I've always thought to myself, how wonderful would it be if we had like the perfect volunteer from our community who we could pair with the chaplain, and they could represent the community visiting the Jewish patients. And it sort of percolates in the back of my head, but of course it never goes anywhere because whatever, that's just what happens to many good ideas. Okay, so the chaplain is here. Last Wednesday morning, he's picking up the meals. And who happens to be here at the exact same moment? Someone in the community who also was here to volunteer and to help deliver meals to people. And this person's life and circumstances are such that they are perfectly suited to play this role. They have experience in the hospitals. It's a unique environment. They happen to have the time to volunteer. They happen to have the personality of interacting well with the patients. And they just strike up a conversation almost coincidentally with the chaplain. They're schmoozing with each other. They're talking with each other. And they begin talking about this idea. And I thought to myself, wow, it literally slaps you in the face. What are the chances out of all the people that came throughout the day to pick up packages that these two people would end up here at the exact moment in order to make that connection happen? We'll see where it goes, but sometimes it hits you, sometimes it slaps you in the face. Now, sometimes it doesn't slap you in the face. Sometimes something happens and it seems like this wasn't the plan and you're frustrated and you're like, why did this happen to me? And you just don't understand what's going on over here. And that's the way it remains. And it's very frustrating. You know, it's interesting. Our sages talk about heaven and hell in Judaism. Heaven and hell. The Jews believe in heaven and hell. And the answer is no. The heaven and hell of Christianity, we don't believe in. But yes, there is a heaven and hell in Judaism. And in fact, the way Judaism explains heaven and hell, the Kabbalists explain heaven and hell is as follows. The ultimate heaven, the ultimate reward, is to really experience the good, positive results of the little things that you did throughout your life. The little things that you thought were nothing, were meaningless, and you saw no results. You just did something good. You made a good choice. You were kind to someone. And as far as you know, it meant nothing. It went nowhere. You come up to heaven and they show you the incredible things that you brought into the world, the love and the kindness and the emotions and the goosebumps that you created throughout your life by those little positive decisions. And what is hell? Hell is the opposite. Person does little things, makes little mistakes, is in a bad mood, is nasty to someone, is a little bit dishonest, slips up on their integrity. Yeah, okay, big deal. You know what hell is? To see all the darkness and pain and suffering that you brought into the world. That's the ultimate, okay? And so when it comes to hashgacha pratis, to things happening in our lives that are out of our control, the ultimate gift is something which most often doesn't happen, but we believe that it happens, that incredible things happen as a result of the small things that we decide to do, or as a result of the small things that happen in our lives that are out of our control. Okay, let's look at text number 7 for an example of this. Beautiful book that I recommend. The book is titled, How You Can Make an Impact in 30 Seconds Without Knowing It. And she says as follows, right? This poor woman, she lost her mother when she was 15 years old. And she says, text number 7, page 138, on the day of my mother's funeral, I remember sitting in the back seat of our car, pulling into the parking lot where the service was going to be held, and seeing 2 old friends of mine from elementary school walking inside. I was 15 at the time. It had never occurred to me that they would miss school to be there for me. This simple act of support meant more to me than they will ever know. So what happened? A 15-year-old girl lost her mother. 2 of her classmates showed up to the funeral. As far as they know, they came, they paid their respects, they left, they were among a crowd of many. Maybe their parents forced them to go. We have no idea. But this woman writes decades later how meaningful it was to her, her 15-year-old mind, that her 2 classmates took the time to come to her mother's funeral. And how many stories are there like this that are happening in our lives? Constantly. It's constantly happening, right? You know, there's this beautiful text over here, which we're not going to read inside, but I encourage you to read it on your own. It's a very long text where the Rebbe discusses the idea of hashgacha pratis, divine providence. And he describes how you could have a yeshiva student in the 1950s in America when American Jews were dropping any outward appearance of Judaism. And you'll have a young Hasidic man walking through the streets of an American city. And somebody will say, "Oi, who's this Grina? Who is this immigrant from Poland walking through our streets with a yarmulke, with payas, with a Jewish appearance?" And we say to him, oh no, he's not a Green, he's not from Poland, he's a Bostonian. He's an American-born boy from Boston, but he walks around looking like a Jew. What an impact it could have, said the Rebbe, upon those who see. And the kid who's walking has no idea what an impact he's making just walking down the street. You know, I'm reminded of a story. And again, I encourage you to read this text number 8 on your own. It's a very, very powerful text. I'm reminded of a story that I heard not too long ago from a dear friend of mine, a colleague of mine who lives in South Africa, Rabbi Ari Shishler. And he told an incredible story. He would go with his family to a vacation town in South Africa. They live in South Africa. Vacation town called Plettenberg Bay. The story happened a couple years ago. And so they were on vacation. You know, rabbis are people too. They go on vacation. And even a rabbi, when you're on vacation, you're just in the mood of being with your family. You're not looking to be a rabbi on vacation. You just want to be on vacation, right? And he's sitting in whatever, lounge he's sitting in. And this Jewish fellow walks over to him and says, are you a rabbi? Yes. Are you a Chabad rabbi? Yes. Oh, do I have a story to tell you? You got a few minutes? He's thinking to himself, do I have a choice? Oh, yeah, okay, fine, sure. Man sits down. He says, this story goes back 8 years ago. And he's thinking to himself, and it's going to take 8 years for you to tell it. All right? 8 years ago, he says, I was sitting right here in this room. Apparently, it was some sort of a place where Jewish vacationers would gather. He says, I'm a local. And throughout the year, this is a sleepy town. We have a couple hundred Jews here. But every summer, everyone comes to this town and we get overwhelmed, overloaded. And I was sitting here relaxing, taking it easy. And these 2 Chabad students walk in. And they're going from person to person, finding out who's Jewish and asking them to put on tefillin. Mm-hmm. And by the time they came to me, I was incensed. Chutzpah, we're on vacation. What are you bothering us? What's it your business? He was like, he says, I was working myself up. And when they came to me, I just exploded. I said, no, I am not going to put on tefillin. There's no way I'm going to put on. I'm not interested. I don't like what you guys do. This is disgusting. He says, I gave them an earful. The boys were like, okay, fine, whatever. They spoke to me a little bit. At the end, they said, are you sure you don't want to put on tefillin? Chabad boys, they don't know how to let go. And they went on to the next person. He says, that night I went home. I was talking to my wife. I told her what happened. And she says to me, you should be ashamed of yourself. What's wrong with you? You're Jewish. You grew up with this. Why couldn't you be respectful to them? Come on. And the truth is, you should have put on tefillin, she says to me. And I said to her, you're right. I'm going to put on the tefillin tomorrow. Mm-hmm. He says, the next day I put on the tefillin. I just put them on. After a few minutes, I took them off. And I started doing this every day. And comes Rosh Hashanah, the new year. I said, you know what? Instead of just putting on the tefillin, I'm also going to pray. I'm going to say the Shema while I'm wearing the tefillin. And so for an entire year, I put on the tefillin and I prayed. The next Rosh Hashanah, I thought to myself, you know what? A Jew who puts on tefillin and prays should also study some Torah. So I went into my attic. I dusted off an old book from my grandfather, a old version of the Bible translated into English. And I read the weekly Torah portion. And it was written in ancient English, thou and thee, and it made no sense. And so I went onto the internet and I said, modern version of the Torah. And this great website popped up called Chabad.org. And they have this commentary on the Torah portion. And I started reading for that year. I read the weekly Torah portion with all the commentary of Chabad.org. Did that for a year. After a year, I thought to myself, you're so selfish. You're putting on tefillin, you're praying, you're learning the Torah portion. And there's all these Jews who live in the town who don't know anything about this. Why don't you invite a couple of Jews to your house, help them put on tefillin, learn the Torah portion with them? And he says to Rabbi Shishler, I've been doing this now for 4 years. For 4 years, every week I get together with a bunch of Jews in this town of Plettenberg Bay, and we have a Torah class, and we put on tefillin, and we learn the commentary from Chabad.org, and it's just a beautiful thing. And he says to Rabbi Shishler, the one thing that I regret is those boys have no idea what they accomplished that day. For all they know, an old grumpy man screamed at them and they moved on. If only I could tell them what they accomplished that day. And Rabbi Shishler says, I remember that day. My friend and I were very hurt by the way you treated us. And I'm glad to know the rest of the story. Okay? So sometimes God is kind to us and he pulls aside the curtain and he lets us know exactly what happened. But most often it's not the case. But that's where Amunah kicks in. We have our faith and we know that incredible things are being accomplished by the little choices that we make, by the way we react to the things that are happening in our lives that are out of our control. Taking this now a step further, okay? Not only the things that are happening to us are God sending us messages about meaning and purpose, but when we're given the opportunity to see something, when something comes in front of us, when we become aware of something, even if it's mundane, even if it doesn't have a religious or moral context, if we become aware of something that's not part of our normal course of the day, we have to always ask ourselves, what's the message? What's the message? What is my handler sending me? Remember the Mossad agent? What message, what clue is my handler sending me of what I'm supposed to be doing right now? Right? Beautiful text over here, text number 9. And again, I encourage you, when you have a chance, read through text number 8. But text number 9, the Rebbe explains this in a beautiful way. Page 143. Everything that God created in this world has purpose. He did not create a single thing in vain. This is from the Talmud. The same is also true of all events and occurrences in the world. Nothing happens in vain. Everything is under divine providence. As a result, in the world, meaning in the personal world of each and every individual, there exists only God and the person. Everything else is merely a means through which the individual fulfills their service of God. Anything that does not pertain to their service of God is something they have no awareness of. For there is no thing or awareness that is in vain. The entire world, one's personal world, is nothing more than a tool and a medium through which they reach their purpose, the ultimate goal for which they were created. So if something is not part of your world, your purpose, it won't enter your world. If it enters your world, it's there for a purpose. If it enters your realm of awareness, then it is there for a purpose. Or in the words of the Baal Shem Tov, back to the Baal Shem Tov, right? Text number 10, every single thing one sees or hears is an instruction for their conduct in the service of God. This is the idea of avodah, service, to comprehend and discern in all things a way in which to serve God. Right? We have the famous story that I'm sure you've heard before. I've told it many times. Famous story of the Rebbe's wife, Rebbe Chaya Mushka, very special woman, who had a routine every day. She would go, she was an older woman, she had poor health. She would be driven by a fellow who was her driver, who would take care of her. She would be driven every day to a local park, down Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, to Prospect Park, where she would spend a little bit of time in the fresh air, and then she would come back home. And the story goes that one time she was being driven on Eastern Parkway, and the road was closed, maybe construction or whatever, and they drove onto a side street. And the driver noticed that as soon as they drove off of their regular route, she perked up and she was looking around. She was looking for something. Suddenly she says, stop, roll down the window. This was the 70s. You have to roll down the window, right? Roll down the window. Do you hear that sound? The driver listens carefully. He hears the sound of a woman crying, a woman shouting. She says to him, go find out what that is. Gets out of the car, goes, comes back with very sad news. This poor woman, an immigrant woman from Poland, is being evicted from her apartment. She doesn't speak English. She and her children are standing on the sidewalk. The sheriff is there. The police are there carrying all their stuff out. They're being evicted. She says to her driver, please go find out how much is needed to get them back into their apartments, if they'll accept a personal check, and if the police will carry her belongings back into the apartments. So he goes over to the officer in charge. He names an amount. It was over $3,000. This is the 1970s, a lot of money back then. And he says, sure, as long as we can call the bank, confirm the funds, we'll be happy to carry the belongings back into the apartment. And bottom line, this is what happened. She pulls out her checkbook. She writes a check. And the officer says, 1 second, I want to tell the woman who helped her, maybe she can meet her. The Rebbe's wife says, no, let's move. Let's get out of here. I don't want to meet her. I don't want her to be embarrassed in front of me. Give the money, make sure it's taken care of. Let's go. After a few minutes of driving, he says to her, Rebbetzin, that was a beautiful thing to do. But there's a lot of people out there who need help, including a lot of Jewish people. Right? It's a mitzvah to help every human being. But, there's a world of Jewish people and Jewish causes. There's this beautiful organization called Chabad that you can help with $3,000. Right? I don't think he said that, but, he was thinking that. And she says, my father, her father was the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, taught me the idea of hashgacha pratis, the idea that everything that happens in your life, everything that you become aware of is part of your purpose. She says, imagine if my entire purpose of existence, for whatever number of decades I'm here in this world, with all of my life's experiences, was for this one mitzvah to be performed. What if that was my entire purpose? Would it not be worth $3,000? Would it not be worth spending $3,000 to fulfill your purpose in life? If you become aware of something, if something enters your world, your periphery vision, it's being shown to you for a purpose. Finally, one final point, and that is, even when we see someone else's negative traits, if we become aware of someone else's flaws, if someone else experiences shame in front of us, and there's a certain crass human nature to laugh, to talk about the other person, to make fun of the other person, to criticize the other person. But it's hashgacha pratis, it's divine providence. Why is this being shown to me? Obviously, it's not being shown to me so I should do a sin of making fun of another person. It's being shown to me so that I can help the other person, so that I can judge the other person in a favorable light, so that I can cover up the other person's shame. Right? We have that famous story quoted here in text number 11, Noah, after the flood, survives the flood, and he goes and he plants grapes and he makes wine. It's his first experience with alcohol. He gets drunk and he ends up lying in a drunken state, unclothed, in shame. And his son, Ham, one of his three sons, sees him and comes to his other brothers making fun of him. Our father is laying on the floor, he's drunk, without clothing. And the other two boys, Shem and Yafes, it says they took a cloak and they covered their father's, they held it up so they shouldn't see their father's shame, and they covered him. But the wording of the Torah, if you look in the second text on page 11, what does it say? Shem and Yafes took a garment, laid it across their shoulders, and walked backward to cover their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. Now, we're quoting here from a verse in the Torah. Let's just jump ahead and we'll see these exact words. Okay? Their faces were turned backward, and their father's nakedness they did not see. So seemingly, this is redundant, right? If they were turned away, obviously they didn't see. If they didn't see, they must have been turned away. What are we being taught over here? It's two things. They turned away, they didn't see his physical shame, right? They did not see, this was their attitude. They refused to contemplate something negative about their father. They chose to see their father in a positive light, right? This is what the Kabbalists explain. Their faces were turned backward, this physical orientation. They did not see their father's nakedness. This is their attitude. We choose to see things in a positive light. Says the Baal Shem Tov, when you come across someone else's negativity, when you become aware of someone else's flaws, someone else's shame, it's being shown to you for one purpose, so that you can make a difference, so that you can help to cover up for that person, so that you can assist that person and bring them into a better light. Right? So very, very powerful. And the reason why Ham, the other son, was punished was not just for physically looking at his father, but for the attitude, for taking this opportunity of seeing someone else's shame and using it for gossip and making fun of another person. And this is also part of this idea of hashgacha pratis. If God ordained things in such a way that this comes into my periphery, I'm going to see it with a sense of purpose. Now, for the next couple of minutes, I want to go back to what we brought up all the way in the beginning. What about not just the things that are unchosen, but the things that are unwanted? the things that are tragic, things that occur that are very, very painful and difficult. How do we find purpose in such an arena? And again, this is such a very, very heavy subject. And for me to share any of this with you, I think is inappropriate. Let's hear it in the words, in the stories of two very special people who happen to be Chabad rabbis. But what makes them special is not their being rabbis, but it's their stories, each one unique, what they've experienced and how they chose to interpret it into something a little bit more positive. I will just say that in the first story, there's the end of the video, he's being interviewed in a more religious podcast. There's a couple of words that he uses in Hebrew, which are not translated. One of the words that he uses is shlichus. Shlichus means my mission or my purpose. So when you hear that word, that's what it translates into. You can watch the screen here. No, it's not my son.
My name is Avrami Zippel. I'm a rabbi here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I am 28 years old, and I was sexually abused by my nanny for a decade. I realized that it never gets easier. The words "I was sexually abused as a child" never roll off your tongue. If I'm going to acknowledge that something terrible has been done to me, which I was not party to, which I was not complicit in, what kind of God lets that happen? I testified on Tuesday, February 5th, and later that day my story was published. I was a survivor of sexual abuse for the whole world to know. For so many different reasons, it was the most healing thing I could have ever done. When I started healing, I think for me that was probably the biggest question, is if I'm not so terrible, where does that put me with God? What I can say is that having been on this journey with everything that it has entailed, leaves not a shadow of a doubt in my mind that this journey is divinely inspired. I could not be more thankful or grateful or appreciative to God for having given me the ability to see His hand guiding me down this path. When I was really wrestling with the idea of coming forward, one of the things that I wanted to get a sense of, there's got to be someone out there that I could talk to. Like, who are the frum male survivors that are still within the community that I can, kind of take their temperature on the whole thing.
Right.
One night I sat down and I Googled it. I couldn't find anybody. Like high and low. Like Google was like, I'm sorry. Do you want to switch around the keywords? And it occurred to me, at that point, there was no one that I possibly knew of, that Google knew of. And I think for me, being a Lubavitcher, when we think about shlichus, what does it mean for someone to be a shliach? I think the Rebbe taught us that if you are a guy in Kollel and you're 24 years old and you're living in Crown Heights and you learn about the plight or the needs of the Jews in Zambia. So 2 days ago, the new couple announced they're moving to Zambia. Why? Who? What? Why would they do that? The Rebbe taught us to view the world in a way that if you are from the Golan and you're from Alaska and you know that there's Yidden in Zambia who need Yiddishkeit, and you know of a void, you're like, oh, well, that's unfortunate. Step into that void. If you know of a place that can use service, if you've learned of that service, take
There's
that
a
as a
need.
sign from on high. That service is calling your name. That's shlichus. You know of a space. Don't leave that space vacant. Step into that space. I think for me, seeing that dynamic, I viewed it when I just made the decision to come forward, and I viewed
As
it till today
shlichus.
as shlichus. You know,
Awesome.
you learn about a void, you learn about a space in a community that is not being filled. Fill that space. So you don't have to move necessarily. You don't have to leave your other shlichus. But if there is a space in the community that needs attention and it needs TLC and it needs
Awesome.
it needs a filling. Shlichus means fill a space. You see a space in the world, it's not just there for you to wonder about, it's for you to feel a calling. And for me, that's shlichus.
Okay. One more. 1 second. And the reason why I'm showing you this one is because here, the previous story, and again, if you want to learn more about him, there's a lot of interesting videos and interviews. A very, very special young man. We actually interviewed him here in our community a couple of years ago during COVID. We had him on a Zoom presentation. Fascinating, tragic, heartbreaking, but an incredible story. He's now obviously a survivor, but he's seeing now the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. What about when a person is in the throes of the tragedy? And for this, I want to introduce you to a man that I'm sure you've been introduced to already, a rabbi from Israel who was injured during the recent war, lost both of his legs in an explosion while he was on duty with the IDF. And this is an interview that he gave. A lot of it is in Hebrew, so make sure you can see the subtitles on the bottom. Rabbi Zera is truly, truly an incredible man. And with this, we're going to conclude.
Rabbi Liraz Zeira is a Chabad emissary to Nachalot, Israel, and services students in Jerusalem campuses. He is a major in the IDF reserves, having served in an elite Givati unit, and then as a reserve combat officer in a tank battalion. Rabbi Liraz recently trained to become an IDF rabbi, but along the Syrian border, his life took a dramatic turn.
אז נפרדתי, זה יום אחרון אחרי 7 חודשים של קו. אני אמור
זה היום האחרון, אחרי 7 חודשים?
למחרת אני חוזר הביתה.
וואו.
באתי להגיד שלום לפלוגת חי"ר שהייתה תחתנו. אחד החיילים אמר לי שהעירוב נראה לו פחות תקין.
העירוב זה הקו שתוחם את האזור, כדי שבשבת אפשר יהיה ללכת עם דברים
בדיוק. הגדרה הלכתית מדויקת. הלכתי לבדוק אותו, במהלך זה דרכתי על רימון שכנראה נשאר שם מהכיבוש של התל.
The explosion shredded his legs and sent him rolling down a hill. He began to bleed out.
היית לבד?
הייתי לבד, זחלתי למרכז...
ואתה מבין שאין לך רגליים?
אני מבין שהרגליים לא מקשיבות לי. והתחלתי לזחול לכיוון הציר, איזה 20-30 מטר, עד ששמעתי את החיילים מגיעים לכיווני, התחלתי לצעוק, חיילים מגיעים לכיווני.
למה הם הגיעו?
כי הם שמעו פיצוץ, כי הם ראו עשן, היו בטוחים שיש התקפה על המוצב.
Rabbi Liraz was evacuated in critical condition. As he fought for his life and fought to stay alert, he also fought back his screams to avoid traumatizing the younger soldiers. And while directing those aiding him, he began his spiritual fight.
באיזשהו שלב אני יוצא את העיניים ואומר, טוב, תשחרר, תן להם להוביל. והתחלתי להגיד תהילים. אחד החיילים שרואה אותי ממלמל, אז הוא מצטרף. הוא התחיל להגיד, שמע ישראל. ואני פותח את העיניים ואומר לו, לא! אני נשאר פה, אני לא הולך לשום מקום. לא יודע איך...
איזה תהילים אמרת ראשון?
את הפרק של הרבי, את הפרק שלי, את הפרק של הילדים שלי, שיר למעלות.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי להרים?
Rabbi Liraz soon discovered that his legs had been amputated. Even in the face of life-changing injury, purpose gave him strength. With a mission in mind, he realized his life hadn't ended, it had only changed direction. Even in loss, purpose became his anchor.
במקום באסה או כל דבר כזה, נהיה לי פשוט מאוד רוגע. ואני יכול להשליך את זה רק על דבר אחד, שזה באמת הזכות להיות חסיד של הרבי מלובביץ' ושליח של הרבי מלובביץ', ולקבל את הנושא הזה של באמת, אין דבר כזה נכה צה"ל. אין מושג כזה נכה צה"ל, יש מצויני צה"ל. אתה לא משהו נחות, אתה לא נכה, זה דבר שנופל, זה... לא. אתה הדבר הכי מצוין שיש, הכי גבוה שיש, ופשוט באותו רגע הבנתי שיש לי שליחות חדשה. שנגמר פרק בחיים שלי ומתחיל פרק חדש לגמרי.
Being thrust into the national spotlight clarified one thing. He had something to give. His influence had direction. It had meaning.
שיש לי מה לתת, שאני חייב לתת את זה, שיש לי המון השפעה על אנשים.
That drive gave meaning to every step he would take next. His mission wasn't just personal. It was to inspire others, showing that challenges can become a calling.
יש לנו יצקו את הקטע שהוא רוקד בראש חודש, נכנס ראש חודש מר חשבן, העלית את הסרטון הזה.
Each act, each post, each interaction became an expression of his purpose, helping others find their own.
תשמע, יש לך כוחות. תאמין בעצמך ותדע שאתה תמיד יכול. ואני יוצא מהאירוע הזה לא רק ביודע שאני יכול, אלא יודע שאני קיבלתי מתנה. זה מאוד קשה להגיד. זה באמת מאוד קשה להגיד, אבל אני אומר את זה בלב שלם לגמרי, שאומנם רגליים איבדתי, אבל שליחות חדשה קיבלתי. וקיבלתי אותה בהמון המון שמחה, והמון באמונה, ובידיעה שאני הולך לצמוח מזה. אני הולך לרוץ יותר ממה שרצתי קודם, זה לא כזה קשה. אני הולך להיות אולי אפילו טיפה יותר גבוה. אני הולך להיות לי כל מיני מבחר של רגליים, כאלה של שטח וכאלה של... ואני הולך להשתמש בזה ואני הולך לעוף על זה, גם בגשמיות וגם בהשפעה של זה.
Each set of legs represented a new way to turn limitation into opportunity, to transform loss into meaning. This calling was now the engine behind every step. Rabbi Liraz's journey shows that purpose changes everything. Even when life takes something from you, a mission gives every moment meaning, every challenge a reason to rise. His new mission and the meaning it brings is only just beginning.
זה שלרבי מלובביץ' יש הרבה סוגי שליחים בעולם, במקומות נידחים, אבל שליח כמוך, עם מה שאתה תהיה עכשיו, זה לא היה לו עד היום, ובהצלחה בשליחות הגדולה.
Okay, so with that we have concluded lesson 5. Please join us for our final discussion on this incredible topic. Lesson 6, the inherent meaning that flows from within every single individual. Please join us next week. Looking forward to seeing you. Sei gesund.
That was very good.
Wasn't so bad, huh?
Oh, no, it was a whole little different point of view.
See,
that
that's what happens when you suspend disbelief.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that offer to me.